Alright, welcome to part 2 of the mirror modifier video. Just a correction from the previous part 1 and into the part 2. You're going to hear me say symmetry modifier sometimes or mirror modifier sometimes. I mean to say mirror modifier. It's just an old hang up from my 3ds Max days back in the day. So with that being said, let's get into it. Alright, I'm going to use the mirror modifier to create a dagger of some kind and just, help us speed our workflow up a little bit, right? So I'm going to immediately add a cube, right? And then the first thing I need to do is sort of set this cube up for symmetry, right? So immediately what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, I'm going to work in front view for this. And for the front view, I want to see sort of the profile of the dagger. And then I want it to mirror kind of halfway over, right? So what does that mean? It means I'm going to cut the cube in half. Right, I'm just going to run a loop cut, and I'm going to double check the loop cut to make sure that the factor is exactly 0, right? Then I'm going to grab this face over here, I'm going to hit X, and then delete the vertices, not the faces, because I want to fully slice this cube in half, right? Once that's done, I'm going to add a mirror modifier. Now by default, it's going to be mirroring sort of left to right relative to the front view, right, down the X-axis. And to fix this, all we have to do is just click Y, but then untick X, right? Because if we were to just click Y, okay, it seems to have appeared to solve our problem, but what we're actually doing is mirroring on both Y and X, right? So we want to untick X and make sure that Y is ticked. And now we're all good to just get modeling, right? So for a knife blade, I'm gonna define the rough shape, right? Sort of like so. Maybe extrude that and then start, scaling this to 0. Make sure that my clipping modifier is turned on, and I'm going to merge by distance, move these into the middle so that they begin clipping. And then I'm going to quickly view to make sure that the operation I just did didn't add any extra geometry in the middle that I don't care about, right? That I don't want. Okay, so now I've got the sort of like the rough, like not the rough shape of a blade per se, but it's got a flat face and it's got edges, right? And that's what I really care about. So now I can just start, using all the tips and tricks and tools that you would typically use for box modeling in Blender, but, start thinking of a bit of a design. So maybe, what could I do? Maybe I could do like a bit of a curved fantasy dagger style design. So I'm just going to use the loop cut here, and I'm going to add lots and lots of extra faces, right? Now, I'm not really too concerned about, the topology or anything right now, or in general for a prop like this, because this is just it's going to be a stylized, non-deforming sort of flat object, right? So what I'm going to do is use the dissolve commands to get rid of all of these interior faces here that make up this flat face, just so that I can now quickly, I can add as much geometry as I want, and it's just going to deform this local little area, right? So I'll add like a little bit of a hook, because every fantasy dagger, is not really a knife per se. It's more like this weird torturous device with all these like extra sharp bits all over it, so we'll do that. And at this point it's just about getting creative, right? So I also kind of want, I don't like the way that this terminates to this edge here, so what I'm going to do is use the subdivide tool by, I'll just do that one again a little slower. I'm going to click the edge, I'm going to right click and hit subdivide. That's going to put a vert here. Now what I could do is say slice from this vert to the tip, and now use the dissolve tool to start clearing up those edges around there. So I've gone and made, like, I guess just a nicer, sharper point, right? Because now when I say curve the back of the blade, for instance, right, this could be a little bit of a nice detail here, and you can see how it's going to come into that like nice tip there, right? And then maybe if I move that back. Another thing as well as I want to keep checking is I want to make sure that the blade face that I'm working with is remaining flat, because that's just the style I want. And if you're going to be doing, sometimes when you're modeling and doing knife cuts or, insets and things like that, you might end up sort of doing this, right? You might have some of your geometry look a little bit wonky, right? So you want to make sure you scale it in and flatten it out. Now, the more, I guess, advanced modelers among you will notice that I'm working with a giant n-gon here, right, on the flat face of the dagger. And that's perfectly okay, because by the time we're done with this, this is going to just be triangulated out. There's not going to be any n-gons left, and it speeds up my modeling process, right? In this instance, having the n-gon as the big face of the knife is actually beneficial to the process of making the knife, right? It's actually making us work faster. It's making our work a little bit easier. So in this instance, perfectly fine to use them. Okay, that there. Maybe I'll smooth this out a little bit more, actually, this little end bit. But beyond this, this is pretty much a decent design for a fantasy type dagger, right? I might even smooth this out a little bit. Just adding enough geometry that I need to make these curves be, you know, nice and curved, and then have them come into these like jagged points. That's the design that I'm looking for in this instance, right? And I'm constantly zooming out and looking at the blade from a distance, right? Because for a style like this, we need it to read at a distance. That's kind of the point, right? So if you think back to, you know, early World of Warcraft designs, games like League of Legends, to a lesser extent like Overwatch and these sorts of things, they're all about these incredibly strong, stylized, sharp, angular forms, right? About these like, they read well from a distance, right? Yeah, so what do we need now? We need a handle and a handle and like a guard of some kind, right? So I'll just add a cube, remembering that I'm working with the symmetry modifier, right? So when I've added that cube, remember it's added another side. So I need to just double check that I'm getting rid of the geometry I don't want to use, right? So if I drag the cube over to the axis that I'm working on, this side, and just position this face back, I can turn the mirror modifier off and note, okay, there's a big face in the middle. I'm going to press X followed by F to just delete that face. And I'm going to turn symmetry back on. Scale this in a little bit, probably bring these back. And, you know, I think it's probably going to look nice if I keep the shape language of the guard, let's say, like kind of matching the silhouette of the blade itself, right? So more like this, you know, something like that. What else could we do here? Maybe we could do an inset here and then extrude down. But an interesting thing about working with the mirror modifier is because I'm sort of insetting on the edge, now I've got like this weird emptiness in the middle, and I don't want that. There's a button on the inset modifier to fix this, right? So if I perform that inset command again, and then I look down here, you've got boundary, offset, even, relative, blah, 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 blah. If I untick boundary, what that's sort of going to do is it's going to, if I turn the mirror modifier off, it's going to say, look, this edge here is connected to other polygons here, here, and here, right? Tick, 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 tick. But this edge here is not, which means this is a boundary edge, right? So when I inset with boundary unticked, that's perfect, because it's going to mean that our detail is going to run right along that symmetry line, which is exactly what we want, right? I'm going to give this a little bit of thickness like so, and then extrude down, right? So that, let's just say that's a decent guard. It's not, you know, it's a knife. It's just meant to look a little interesting. But now we need like some sort of a handle. I could use the inset command again to make the handle, right? So if I inset and then extrude down, I can now start shaping these pieces of geometry into something, you know, more consistent with a handle design that I want. I'm gonna leave it low and sort of a chunky low poly cylinder, because that's, you know, largely the style that this is sort of working in. But I don't want it to be like a straight handle, right? Like the curve of the blade kind of, maybe it starts a little bit on this like S shape. If I continue the blade around, that could be interesting, the handle, and potentially even I could maybe rotate the handguard such that that curvature is a little bit more pronounced, right? Maybe something like this. And these are just, you know, this is just the generic shape language of sort of basics, generic, like low poly fantasy kind of hand painted looking stuff, right? It's got a good amount of appeal to it, right? Even though at this point in time, it's you know, there's a fair amount of content there, but there's a reason for it, right? It's a nice, satisfying style. It's nice to look at visually, and it's not that difficult to really make either. So it's a good introductory style. The good thing about it, though, is that there's a lot of, you could say the skill ceiling is very high, right, to executing art like this. I would say the barrier to entry is low, but the skill ceiling is incredibly high, right? To make something really shine in this style, it's really got to have a lot of appeal. Actually, I'm not going to make this happen, you know, evenly across the handle. I'm actually going to leave this a little sort of uneven in terms of the width of these, because Uniformity to me just appears like a little bit boring here. And maybe I could even reverse sort of the direction, maybe. Something like that, so that it's not always just the exact same, you know, extrusion. And then we got to cap this off in some way. There's a few different things we could try, right? We could try and add like a cube for a pommel. That might work in this instance, but maybe just checking the shape. It's a bit, the sword is a bit too curved and a bit too angular for like a cube pommel. So maybe we could even say it's like a carved piece of wood that terminates into a point. So if I scale that to 0, interestingly, because we're working with the symmetry modifier, right, it can't, with clipping on it, sort of can't scale it to 0. But if I scale it to 0, merge doubles, merge by distance, and then merge last, that's going to clean all that geometry up. But I'm going to double check. Cool. Yeah, absolutely no interior geometry. That's a bit weird there. Let's have a look. Maybe I could give this more like a sharp, yeah, something much more like this. Hook it back up. You know, maybe that's like a metal spike on the bottom, like who knows, right? Now that could work. I think the handle is a bit like long. I think the width is nice, but it just needs to be proportioned a little bit better maybe. Something like that? Yeah, that's looking pretty cool. Lastly, we'll go through and we'll do a little bit of smoothing, right? We'll just do a little bit of work to smooth this out, right? So this is very faceted at the moment, right? Is what you would call this shading. This is either flat shaded or faceted shaded, depending on, you know, your exact terminology. But what I mean by that is that you can see each individual polygon. Tick, 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 right? With a blade, we don't want that. What we want is a handful of edges that are very sharp, like this one, this one, this one, and this one, right? And then the blade edge itself, which runs around. And then the central flat face there. We want all these to be very sharp, but we want the rest to be smooth. How do we do that, right? So we do that by a process of selecting edges, marking them for sharp, and then determining what Blender does with that information. Okay, so I'll show you step by step, just step A, step B, step C, what we need to do this, and then I'll explain it, right? So in order to mark an edge as sharp, we need to click and select the edges we care about, right? We then need to right-click or hit Control-E, right? Control-E brings up the edge menu, right-click brings up the edge context menu. They're very similar. Scroll down to where it says Mark Sharp and click that. You'll know it was done correctly when you have like a light blue cyanish line, right? Now, but nothing's changed, right? So the second step would be, well, we need to embed smoothing data into this model. We can do that by being in object mode, right-clicking, and hitting Shade Smooth, okay? So now it's made the whole thing look like a blob, right? This isn't sharp at all, okay? Because we need a third and sort of final step. We need to tell the model how to use that smoothing data, that sharp edge. The way we do that, well, one of the ways I should say, is we scroll down here to the object data properties panel with the object selected. We click that. Then we scroll down to the normals. Now normals are a whole topic in themselves. I will make a video just covering normals because they are a huge deal. But as far as you're concerned, all you care about is that auto smooth is ticked, which has done something, right? But it hasn't done everything. And I'll quickly talk about what auto smooth does, right? Auto smooth basically says, instead of specifically marking what is sharp, just say that everything under, every angle between two faces that is under this threshold is sharp, right? So I'll just quickly add a plane, and I'll drag this plane sort of to here. If I drag it there and we hit smooth, right? We can see that the boundary between these is currently like smooth, right? Obviously it's jagged, but you can see the shading there is smooth. If I drag it even higher though, eventually it's going to get to a point where it becomes solid and sharp. Any second now. Interesting. Oh, sorry. Auto smooth turned off. But if I turn that back on, here it is. You can see how it's like, bang, there's like a sharp hard edge there. It shouldn't have had to have been this extreme. I just accidentally had the thing unticked. So if I move that back down, bam, there you can see it's starting to get smooth. Now it's smooth. Now it's solid, right? So auto smooth just kind of does it automatically, which has gotten most of the edges, but it's gotten some we don't want, right? So what we want to do, make sure auto smooth is ticked, but crucially, drag the degrees all the way up to 180. Now, if we notice, we can see our edge, right? Our edge that we marked before is now much stronger. It's marked as a hard edge, a separate edge. Now I can go through and start marking all of these edges, right? Mark sharp. Okay, and I want this one sharp, and I want, you know, these ones around here to be sharp. And now we can start to see the object taking place. Sorry about that, my recording crashed, but just immediately continuing on. Now that we've marked these edges sharp, we can start to see the smoothing of the model, the sharpness, it's starting to sort of take shape, right? So just continuing along, and we can even use our like loop cut tool to just quickly grab that whole edge as far as it'll go, mark that as sharp. We want this one as a sharp edge, mark sharp, and we want this here as a sharp edge, right? We also want this little bit here as a sharp edge. So that's going to allow for the edges of the blade to have this like nice smoothness to them, right? But then the areas that we care about catching the eye are going to be nice and sharp. Oh, there's also this little one here that I want. Mark sharp. Right, so, you know, auto smooth is great and all, but it's not going to do everything you want it to do. It's better to just control it exactly, and this is a simple way to do that, right? You just click the edges, mark sharp, tick auto smooth, crank that to 180, and you're all good to go. We're just going to go down and grab the rest of all the edges that we want to be sharp, right? Grab all that, mark sharp. Now, do I want that to be sharp around that? I think that kind of looks a bit interesting, having it a bit... No, actually, I will mark it sharp, because this would be something maybe made of metal, and that's not going to be that smooth of an edge. If I wanted it to be smooth, I should probably put more geometry there, right? Sorry, not mark seam. I want to be marking sharp. I always get those two confused. Okay, looks good. Looks good, except for these here. I don't want these marked. Okay. I also want the connection between the handle and the guard to be marked sharp. But now in terms of the guard, well, I you know, maybe this is either carved wood or like maybe wrapped wood with like cloth, right? So I only want certain areas of this to be sharp. So maybe just where the form changes, right? Something like this. If we do that, that is much more reminiscent of like a cloth because it's sort of, it's soft on that edge. It's got that like a bit of a wrap there. But if I was to then sharpen that there, you know, maybe that looks more like carved wood. It just depends on the exact shape you're trying to model, right? I'll also touch this up a little bit because that was just kind of sitting there, not really contributing much to the geometry, right? So if you've got just geometry chilling there, you know, each piece, each thing you put on the model, each edge, right, should contribute to the model in some way, right? And if it doesn't, you should probably get rid of it. So that to me looks pretty good, right? Maybe maybe the bottom could be a bit larger. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I'm ruining something that's perfectly fine. But you know, who knows? It's all art at the end of the day. We can do whatever we want with it, right? We can change things whenever. There's always Control Z. It's worth exploring. Yeah, look, I think that looks good to me as just like a generic stylized, you know, fantasy prop. So, what now, right? Check your scales, right? When you're modeling, you know, the default cube starts pretty big. This is a 13 meter tall dagger. We should definitely do something to, you know, prevent that from being so huge, right? So we want to scale that down. A dagger's, I don't know, a fantasy dagger might be what, like 30 centimeters or something like that. So 0.3, roughly in that ballpark. You know, bada bing, bada boom. We want our scales to be zeroed out, so we press Control A, scale, click, and there we have it, right? We have our dagger, right? It's going to look pretty cool if a character's a rogue of some description is dual wielding these, right? They've got a decent shape to them, but crucially, we only had to work on one side, right? Not only that, we only had to mark the edges, the hard edges on one side, right? Because the mirror modifier is going to take care of all of that. And it just means that, you know, if I want to tweak this, or if I want to, maybe I want to tilt this whole face like this to put some interesting like shape to it, right? The mirror modifier just takes care of everything. That actually looks pretty cool, to be honest. I kind of like that change. I'm going to keep that change. Yeah, that's a good change. Just let me quickly scale these out to match that. I think that looks nice. Just that little bit of angular shape. I'll delete this one because that's not a true copy. Yeah, so the mirror modifier is exceptionally powerful. You're going to use this all the time, right? Just remember, watch part 1 so that you're, you know, not making those mistakes that can often trip you up when you're working with the the mirror modifier. But other than that, you know, thanks for watching, and happy modeling. If you have any questions, comments, etc., please leave them underneath the video. I'll try and get to as many of them as I can. I'll try and answer every question I can, either through a comment or through some sort of a video. All right, thank you very much, and take care.